People don't disappear in Siberia because they get lost. They disappear because the cold slowly convinces them to stop moving. Claire Dawson understood that long before the storm swallowed the last sign of the trail behind her. The wind that day moved across the frozen valley at nearly 60 miles per hour, carrying snow so thick it erased distance itself. Trees appeared like dark shadows for only seconds before vanishing back into white emptiness, and the temperature had fallen to minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit before noon. In weather like that, exposed skin could freeze in less than 3 minutes. Even breathing hurt. Every inhale sliced through Claire's chest with a dry, burning cold that felt unnatural, as if the air itself had turned against her. She pulled her scarf tighter across her face and kept walking, though she could no longer feel the tips of her fingers inside her gloves. Somewhere ahead, hidden behind miles of storm and forest, there was supposed to be an old ranger station. A tiny cabin used decades earlier by hunters crossing the Siberian wilderness. It wasn't much, but it had walls, a stove, and enough shelter to survive the night if she could reach it before dark. The problem was that dark came early in winter, and the storm had already begun swallowing the afternoon sky. Claire checked the small compass hanging from her jacket again, but even that felt useless now. Snow had gathered across the glass. Her boots sank nearly knee-deep with every step, draining energy faster than she could recover it. The cold didn't arrive all at once anymore. It crept slowly into the body, quiet and patient, numbing one part at a time until movement became exhausting. First her hands, then her feet, then her legs. Soon even lifting her arms felt heavier than it should have. That was the real danger of extreme cold. Not pain. Silence. The body stopped warning you after a while. It simply began shutting down. Claire tried focusing on memories to stay awake. Her father teaching her how to split firewood behind their cabin in Montana when she was a little girl. Her mother laughing beside the kitchen window while snow piled outside. Warmth. Light. Simple. Things that suddenly felt impossibly far away. The storm howled louder through the trees, breaking her concentration. She stopped walking for a moment and looked around, but there was nothing to see except white snow twisting endlessly through the air. No trail, no landmarks, no sound except the wind. And that was when she realized something terrifying. The forest had gone completely still beneath the storm. No birds, no movement, no signs of life anywhere. It felt less like nature and more like standing inside some enormous frozen ocean. Claire tried taking another step forward, but her boot slipped beneath loose snow hidden over ice. She stumbled hard, dropping to one knee. The impact sent a sharp pulse through her leg, but when she tried standing again, dizziness washed over her so suddenly she nearly collapsed a second time. Her vision blurred at the edges. She blinked hard and forced herself upright, though her balance no longer felt steady. The cold had begun affecting her mind now. She knew the signs. Confusion, fatigue, the strange urge to rest. People who froze to death often made the same mistake near the end. They stopped moving because sleeping felt easier than fighting the storm. Claire swallowed hard and kept walking, but her pace slowed with every passing minute. Snow gathered across her shoulders and hood almost instantly now. Even her eyelashes had begun freezing together whenever she blinked. Somewhere high above the storm clouds, hidden beyond the swirling white sky, a shadow moved silently through the wind. Claire never saw it. She only kept dragging herself forward through the blizzard, unaware that every step was carrying her closer to the moment the storm would finally take her off her feet forever. Claire no longer remembered how long she had been walking when the storm finally began stealing pieces of reality away from her. Time disappeared first. Minutes and hours blended together beneath the endless white sky until it felt like she had been trapped inside the blizzard forever. Her legs moved on instinct alone now, stiff and slow beneath layers of frozen clothing crusted with ice. Every breath came out uneven, sometimes fast and panicked, sometimes strangely calm. That frightened her more than anything else. The human body was not built for temperatures like this. Eventually, the mind stopped resisting. The cold did not attack like a predator. It persuaded. It whispered that resting would feel warm, that closing your eyes for just a moment would make the pain stop. Claire had heard survival experts describe hypothermia before, but hearing about it from inside a heated classroom in Montana was nothing like standing inside a Siberian storm while your own thoughts slowly stopped feeling trustworthy. She stumbled again, this time unable to catch herself before falling hard into deep snow. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. For several seconds, she simply stayed there, too exhausted to move. Snowflakes drifted across her coat almost instantly, disappearing into the growing layer already covering her shoulders and hood. The wind screamed through the trees overhead, but even that sound seemed farther away now. Softer somehow. Claire blinked slowly. Her body felt heavy. Not painful anymore. Just distant. She tried pushing herself upright, but her arms trembled violently beneath her weight. The effort drained what little strength she had left. She collapsed back into the snow with a weak gasp. Her face turned sideways against the frozen ground, and for the first time all day, the cold no longer felt unbearable. It felt quiet, comfortable even. That was the moment she understood how people vanished out here. Not through panic, not through fear, through surrender. Her eyes drifted shut for only a second before another memory surfaced through the fog inside her head. Her father standing beside a fireplace late at night, while snow tapped softly against the cabin windows back home. She remembered him looking at her once after a winter storm and saying something she had never forgotten. The cold is patient. If you ever stop fighting it, even for a minute, it wins. Claire tried repeating those words silently now, but they sounded distant, as though someone else was thinking them for her. She forced her eyes open again. The storm above her had become strangely bright. Snow twisted through the air in pale waves while dark tree branches bent under the weight of ice. Somewhere beyond them, hidden behind clouds and wind, something moved across the sky. Claire barely noticed it. Her vision had narrowed into fragments. White snow, black trees, gray sky, then nothing. Her body sank deeper into the drift beneath her. Snow piled across her legs first, then her arms. The wind covered everything quickly here. In another hour, no trace of her would remain visible from the trail. Rescue teams would search the wrong direction. Spring would arrive months later and melt the forest back into rivers and mud, but by then the wilderness would already have erased her completely. Claire's breathing slowed. She could feel herself drifting somewhere soft and distant, somewhere without pain or cold or fear. And then suddenly something struck her shoulder hard enough to snap her eyes open. She jerked violently in the snow, confused and disoriented. A dark shape loomed beside her through the storm. Large wings beat against the blizzard, scattering powder into the air, while sharp golden eyes stared directly into her face. Claire tried focusing, but her mind struggled to understand what she was seeing. The creature stepped closer, massive talons pressing into the snow near her coat. A golden eagle. It should not have been this close to a human. It should have flown away the second she moved. Instead, it remained beside her, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of its wings in the wind. Claire stared at it in disbelief before another wave of dizziness hit her. She thought maybe she was hallucinating now. People freezing to death often saw impossible things near the end. The eagle suddenly lunged forward, striking at the snow beside her head with its powerful wings. Claire flinched in shock. The bird cried out sharply over the storm, then stepped even closer as though refusing to let her disappear beneath the snow. For several seconds, Claire could only stare at the enormous bird standing beside her in the snow, while her mind struggled to separate reality from the strange, dreamlike haze caused by the cold. The golden eagle looked almost unreal against the white storm around them. Its dark feathers rippled beneath violent wind, while snow collected across the edges of its wings. It was larger than any eagle Claire had ever seen before, nearly 3 feet tall with eyes that seemed unnaturally calm compared to the chaos surrounding them. The bird tilted its head slightly, as if studying her. Then it stepped closer again. Claire tried to pull away instinctively, but her body barely responded. Her legs felt numb beneath the snow and her arms trembled too badly to support her weight. The eagle suddenly struck at the sleeve of her coat with its beak, not hard enough to injure her, but sharp enough to shock her fully awake. Claire gasped and recoiled in confusion. "Go away," she whispered weakly, though her voice vanished instantly beneath the storm. The bird did not move. Instead, it spread its massive wings and beat them violently against the drifting snow around her face, clearing away the powder that had begun burying her shoulders. Snow blasted across Claire's skin as freezing air rushed around her again. She shut her eyes tightly for a moment before forcing herself to look up once more. The eagle cried out into the wind, a sharp, piercing sound that somehow cut through the storm louder than anything else she had heard all day. Then, without warning, it turned away from her and hopped several feet across the snow before looking back again. Claire frowned weakly, trying to understand what it was doing. The bird waited only a moment before crying out again and moving farther ahead through the blizzard. Something about the movement felt intentional, not random, not frightened. The eagle looked back at her once more, as if expecting her to follow. Claire blinked slowly. Her exhausted mind resisted the idea immediately. None of this made sense. Wild animals avoided humans in storms like this, especially predators. Yet the eagle remained close, pacing back and forth through the snow while refusing to disappear into the forest. Another gust of wind slammed into Claire hard enough to nearly roll her sideways in the drift. Snow swept across her face again, instantly covering the place where she had been lying moments earlier. That was when fear finally returned, stronger than the numbness. If she stayed there another 10 minutes, the storm would bury her completely. Claire forced both hands beneath her chest and pushed upward with everything she had left. Pain exploded through her stiff muscles as she managed to lift herself onto one knee. The effort made her dizzy immediately. Black spots drifted across her vision. She almost collapsed again before hearing the eagle scream sharply from somewhere ahead. Claire looked up. Through the swirling snow, she could barely make out the outline of the bird waiting several yards away between dark pine trees. Then it moved again, slow enough for her to follow. She staggered upright. Though her legs shook so violently, she could barely remain standing. The wind fought every movement now. Each step through the snow felt like dragging her body through deep water. Still, the eagle stayed ahead of her, never too far away. Whenever Claire slowed or stumbled, the bird circled back through the storm with another piercing cry before moving forward again. Minutes passed this way beneath the fading gray light of late afternoon. Claire stopped trying to understand why the eagle remained with her. Survival had narrowed her world down to one simple thought: keep moving. The cold had already taken too much from her. Feeling in her hands was almost gone now, and her breathing had become shallow beneath layers of frozen fabric. Yet somewhere inside the storm, the sight of the eagle moving ahead through the white darkness gave her something dangerous in a place like this: hope. Then suddenly the bird vanished completely behind a wall of blowing snow. Claire froze in panic, turning desperately through the trees searching for it. The forest around her looked endless again, empty, silent except for the storm. Her chest tightened as fear crept back into her thoughts. Had she imagined the entire thing after all? She took another weak step forward and nearly collapsed as the ground beneath her right boot cracked sharply under the snow. The sound beneath Claire's boot was soft at first, almost hidden beneath the screaming wind, but she knew immediately what it meant. Ice. Thin ice buried beneath fresh snow. Her body froze in place as another crack spread under her right foot like a spiderweb. The storm had covered everything so completely that she had wandered onto a frozen stream without realizing it. Claire slowly shifted her weight backward, terrified that even the smallest movement might break the surface beneath her completely. Her pulse hammered painfully against the inside of her skull. The cold no longer numbed fear now. It sharpened it. Snow whipped across her face while the forest around her creaked beneath heavy wind. Then somewhere ahead, beyond the blowing white haze, the eagle cried out again. Claire looked up instantly. The bird had reappeared on the branch of a bent pine tree several yards away, its wings partially spread against the storm as if bracing itself against the wind. For a brief second the eagle stared directly at her. Then it launched into the air. Claire watched in disbelief as it circled once over the frozen stream before flying sharply toward the left side of the forest instead of straight ahead. The movement caught her attention immediately. She looked down at the snow beneath her boots again and realized something horrifying. The entire stretch ahead of her looked too smooth, too flat. Hidden ice covered more of the ground than she had noticed. One wrong step would send her through the surface into freezing water she would never escape in time. Her breathing turned shallow. Even thinking clearly had become difficult now. Hypothermia blurred simple decisions into confusion, and the storm erased every familiar sense of direction. Yet somehow the eagle continued appearing exactly when she needed it most. Claire swallowed hard, and slowly stepped backward away from the hidden stream, following the direction the bird had flown moments earlier. Snow immediately filled the shallow impression her boots left behind, as though the wilderness itself wanted to erase all proof she had ever been there. The eagle landed again farther ahead, waiting on another low branch before crying out sharply into the wind. Claire kept moving toward it. Every step hurt now. Her thighs burned with exhaustion while painful tingling spread through her hands and face. She could no longer fully feel her fingers inside her gloves. Worse still, a dangerous warmth had begun creeping through her body beneath the freezing air. She knew enough about severe cold to understand what that meant. People near the final stages of hypothermia often felt strangely warm before losing consciousness completely. Her body was failing. The realization terrified her more than the storm itself. Claire forced herself forward again, using the eagle as her only point of focus in the endless white darkness around her. She no longer cared whether any of this made sense. Logic had disappeared hours ago beneath the blizzard. All that remained was movement. Survival reduced life to very small things. One more breath, one more step, one more minute. The forest thickened around her as the eagle guided her between towering pines heavy with snow. Here the wind weakened slightly beneath the branches overhead, but the cold remained merciless. Claire stumbled against a tree trunk, nearly collapsing again before catching herself weakly with one hand. She closed her eyes for only a moment, trying to steady the dizziness flooding through her head. Instantly, her body begged her to stay there, to rest. The temptation felt overwhelming now. She imagined sitting beneath the tree for just a few minutes until the storm passed, just long enough to recover strength. But somewhere deep inside her, another voice whispered the truth. If she stopped now, she would never stand again. Suddenly, a rush of air exploded beside her face. Claire flinched in shock as the eagle swept past her at arm's length, its enormous wings scattering snow violently across the ground. The bird landed directly ahead of her this time, closer than ever before. It stared at her silently for several seconds before striking its talons hard against the snow, as if demanding movement. Claire stared back through exhausted eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered weakly into the storm. The eagle gave no answer, only another sharp cry before turning deeper into the forest once more. Claire forced herself after it, though her legs barely obeyed anymore. Then, through the swirling snow ahead, she thought she saw something impossible. A faint orange glow flickering somewhere between the trees. At first, Claire thought the orange glow ahead was another hallucination created by the cold. Hypothermia distorted reality in dangerous ways. Survivors often described seeing lights, hearing voices, or imagining warmth that did not exist. The human brain struggled when body temperature dropped too low, and Claire could already feel her thoughts drifting apart like snow caught in the wind. Still, the faint light remained between the trees ahead of her, flickering weakly through the storm. It looked distant but real enough to force her forward again. The eagle moved toward it immediately, gliding low beneath the pine branches before disappearing deeper into the forest. Claire followed as quickly as her exhausted body allowed. Every muscle hurt now. Her knees shook violently beneath her weight, and each breath rattled painfully inside her chest. Ice had formed across the edges of her scarf and collar, stiffening the fabric against her skin. Even blinking felt difficult. Yet the sight of that distant glow awakened something fragile inside her that the storm had nearly destroyed. Hope could be dangerous in places like this. False hope killed people every winter. The wilderness had a cruel way of making salvation appear close when death was actually closer. But Claire could not stop moving now. The alternative was to lie down in the snow and vanish forever beneath the storm. The trees thickened as she pushed deeper into the forest, their massive branches blocking some of the wind overhead. For the first time in hours, the world grew slightly quieter around her. Not warm, never warm, but quieter. Claire staggered between snow-covered trunks while the orange glow ahead slowly grew brighter through the blowing white haze. Then suddenly she saw it clearly at last. A cabin, small and weathered beneath layers of ice and snow, hidden among the trees like something abandoned decades ago. Relief hit her so fast her knees nearly gave out beneath her. The structure looked old, but one small window glowed faintly orange against the storm outside. Firelight. Someone had to be inside. Claire almost cried from the sight of it. Her body surged forward with desperate energy she did not know she still possessed. She stumbled through deep snow toward the cabin while tears froze against her lashes almost instantly. Behind her, the eagle circled once overhead before landing silently on a nearby branch. Claire barely noticed now. Every thought focused entirely on the shelter ahead. Warmth, walls, survival. She reached the front steps and nearly collapsed against the wooden railing. Snow had drifted halfway up the door, forcing her to climb awkwardly through knee-deep drifts just to reach it. Her gloved hand shook violently as she grabbed the handle. Locked. Panic struck immediately. Claire pounded weakly against the door, but the sound felt tiny compared to the storm surrounding the cabin. Help? She tried calling out, though her voice came out hoarse and thin. No answer. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, desperate to see movement inside. What she saw instead made her stomach sink. The orange glow came from an old lantern sitting on a dusty table. Nothing else moved. No fire crackled inside the stove. No footsteps crossed the floor. The cabin was empty. The realization hit harder than the cold. Claire stared through the frosted glass in disbelief while exhaustion crashed over her all at once. The storm had tricked her. This was not rescue. Not safety. Just another forgotten shelter swallowed by the wilderness long ago. Her legs finally gave out beneath her. She slid slowly down the frozen wall beside the cabin door until she sat buried halfway in drifting snow. For several seconds, she simply remained there breathing weakly while the storm continued howling through the trees around her. The lantern inside flickered faintly, casting soft shadows across the empty room beyond the glass. It almost looked welcoming, peaceful even. Claire closed her eyes for just a moment. Her body begged her to rest. Just a few minutes beside the cabin wall. Just enough to recover strength before trying again. The temptation felt overwhelming now, heavier than fear itself. Snow gathered across her coat and hood almost immediately. Somewhere nearby, the eagle screamed sharply into the wind again, louder this time. Claire barely reacted. Her thoughts had begun drifting too far away. The cold no longer felt cruel anymore. Only distant. Soft. Then suddenly something slammed hard against the cabin window directly beside her head. Claire's eyes snapped open in shock as the cabin window rattled violently beside her. For one disoriented second, she thought the storm itself had struck the glass, but then she saw the dark shape beating against the frozen window from outside. The eagle. Its enormous wings slammed against the icy frame while snow exploded into the air around it. The bird cried out again, sharp and furious, pacing back and forth through the drift beside the cabin wall. Claire stared at it weakly, unable to understand why it refused to leave her alone. Most wild creatures would have disappeared hours ago into safer shelter. Yet somehow this eagle remained beside her through every step of the storm, as if her survival mattered to it in some impossible way. Claire closed her eyes again for only a second, but immediately the bird struck the window once more with enough force to shake the old wooden frame. The sudden sound cut through the fog inside her mind. Somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion and cold, instinct returned. The eagle was trying to keep her awake. Claire swallowed hard and forced herself to sit upright again, though every movement felt unbearably slow. Snow had already begun piling across her legs while she rested beside the cabin wall. Another 10 minutes, and the drift might have buried her halfway. That thought terrified her enough to stand again despite the pain surging through her stiff body. The moment Claire rose unsteadily to her feet, the eagle stopped striking the window. It perched silently on the nearby railing instead, watching her with those same piercing golden eyes. Wind howled through the trees around them, while snow swirled across the abandoned cabin roof in endless waves. Claire looked once more through the frosted window at the empty room inside. The lantern still flickered softly on the table, casting warm light over dust-covered furniture and cracked wooden walls. Whoever once used this shelter had been gone for years, maybe decades. There would be no rescue here, no fire waiting for her, no food, only another frozen grave hidden in the wilderness. Claire's legs trembled violently beneath her as she turned away from the cabin. She had almost nothing left now. Her breathing came shallow and uneven while numbness spread farther through her arms and chest. The dangerous warmth inside her body had grown stronger too, making the storm feel strangely distant despite the deadly cold surrounding her. She knew enough to recognize what that meant. Her body temperature had dropped too low. Soon confusion would become unconsciousness, and unconsciousness in weather like this rarely ended with waking up again. The eagle launched suddenly from the railing and glided deeper into the forest once more. Claire watched it disappear between snow-covered trees before hearing another sharp cry somewhere ahead. The bird was still leading her. She shook her head weakly in disbelief. Following a wild eagle through a Siberian blizzard sounded insane even to her. Yet every logical decision she had trusted earlier that day had nearly gotten her killed. At this point, the bird was the only reason she was still standing at all. Claire pulled her frozen scarf tighter across her face and forced herself forward again into the storm. Darkness had begun settling across the forest now, turning the endless snowfields gray beneath the fading light. The temperature continued dropping with every passing minute. Wind pushed through the trees in long hollow waves while ice cracked softly beneath heavy branches overhead. Somewhere ahead, the eagle cried out again before vanishing briefly into the swirling white darkness. Claire followed the sound carefully, using tree trunks to steady herself whenever dizziness threatened to pull her down again. Minutes passed this way through the forest. Slow, painful minutes measured only by footsteps and breath. Then suddenly the wind changed. Claire noticed it immediately. The violent gusts battering the trees weakened as the terrain around her shifted downward into a narrow valley hidden between rocky slopes. Snow still fell heavily here, but the storm no longer struck with the same brutal force. The eagle landed atop a large boulder ahead, silhouetted against the fading sky. Claire stumbled toward it weakly before freezing in place. Far beyond the trees at the bottom of the valley, another light glowed faintly through the storm. Unlike the abandoned cabin, this light moved. Warm orange flickers danced behind real windows somewhere deeper in the forest. And this time, Claire heard something she had not heard in nearly 10 hours. The distant bark of a dog. For a moment, Claire thought the sound had to be another trick created by the storm. Her mind had already betrayed her once with the abandoned cabin and the false promise of safety. But then the bark came again through the trees ahead. Faint, distant, real. Claire stopped breathing for a second as hope surged painfully through her exhausted body. Somewhere beyond the valley, there were people. Real people. The eagle remained perched atop the snow-covered boulder above her, perfectly still against the fading evening sky. Wind swept through its feathers while the last gray light of day disappeared behind heavy clouds. Claire stared at the bird in disbelief. She no longer understood whether she was following instinct, desperation, or something far stranger. All she knew was that every time she had nearly given up, the eagle had appeared again and pushed her forward. The barking echoed once more from deeper in the forest. Claire forced herself downhill toward the sound, nearly slipping several times on ice hidden beneath fresh snow. The narrow valley offered some protection from the storm, but darkness brought new danger with it. Temperatures dropped even lower after sunset in Siberia, and the wilderness changed completely at night. Distances became impossible to judge. Shadows twisted strangely through the trees. Exhaustion turned every shape into uncertainty. Claire could already feel her body beginning to fail faster now. Her legs no longer obeyed smoothly, and her vision blurred every few seconds before snapping painfully back into focus. Worst of all was the exhaustion spreading through her mind. Thoughts came slower now, drifting apart before she could hold on to them completely. The only thing keeping her moving was the distant bark echoing through the valley ahead. The eagle launched silently from the boulder and glided low through the trees once again. Claire followed its dark outline between the pines while snow swirled endlessly around them. Then suddenly the ground beneath her shifted violently. Claire gasped as one leg plunged deep through hidden snow into empty space below. She fell forward hard, catching herself against the frozen ground just before sliding farther downward. Panic exploded through her chest. The valley floor had concealed a narrow ravine beneath layers of drifted snow. Claire pulled herself backward desperately while loose ice crumbled beneath her boots into darkness below. Her pulse thundered painfully inside her ears. Another step forward and she might have disappeared into the hidden drop entirely. Breathing hard, she rolled onto her back beside the edge and stared upward into the storm. Snowflakes drifted endlessly through the darkening sky while the wind roared softly through the valley walls around her. For several terrifying seconds, Claire could not move at all. Her remaining strength had nearly vanished. She wanted desperately to stay there and rest. Just for a minute. The snow beneath her almost felt soft now. Warm even. That frightened her more than the ravine itself. Somewhere above, the eagle screamed sharply through the storm. Claire turned her head weakly and saw the bird circling overhead again, lower this time, almost frantic in its movements. It landed near the ravine edge only a few feet away and struck its talons repeatedly against the snow while crying out toward her. Claire stared at it through half-frozen lashes. "I know," she whispered weakly. "I know." The sound of barking drifted through the valley once more, louder now. Much closer. Claire forced herself upright with trembling arms and carefully moved away from the hidden ravine. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She could barely feel her feet anymore. Yet the barking continued somewhere ahead, joined now by something else. Light. Real moving light weaving faintly. Through the trees below. Not the still lantern glow from the abandoned cabin. This light shifted and flickered against the snow like someone carrying a lantern outside. Claire's chest tightened painfully. Rescue. It had to be rescue. She stumbled forward again as fast as exhaustion allowed while the eagle glided ahead through the darkness. The lights grew brighter between the trees. Voices echoed faintly through the wind now too. Human voices. Claire tried calling out, but her throat barely produced sound. Panic surged through her. What if they could not hear her over the storm? What if she collapsed before reaching them? The eagle suddenly swept downward through the valley with a piercing cry that echoed sharply against the rocky slopes around them. Almost immediately, the barking ahead exploded louder in response. Then a distant voice shouted something through the storm, followed by the beam of a flashlight cutting suddenly across the snow toward her position. The flashlight beam swept wildly through the storm before finally locking onto Claire, where she stood trembling between the trees. For a second, she could not react at all. The bright white light hurt her eyes after hours trapped inside darkness and snow. Then voices echoed through the valley again, closer this time. Real voices. Human voices. A large dog burst through the drift first, barking loudly as it bounded toward her across the snow. Behind it came two figures wrapped in heavy winter gear, carrying lanterns and flashlights against the storm. Claire tried taking another step toward them, but her knees suddenly gave out beneath her completely. The exhaustion she had been fighting for hours crashed over her all at once. She dropped hard into the snow, barely catching herself with frozen hands before collapsing entirely. The dog reached her first, circling anxiously while barking back toward the approaching men. One of them shouted something in Russian before hurrying forward through the drifts. Claire could no longer understand most of the words. Her hearing felt distant now, muffled beneath the roaring storm and the violent pounding of her own heartbeat. Strong hands caught her shoulders gently, helping her sit upright before she fell sideways into the snow again. The older of the two rescuers pulled off one glove quickly and touched her face for only a second before his expression changed immediately. Even through her blurred vision, Claire understood the look. He knew how close she had come to dying out there. The younger man wrapped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders while the dog pressed close beside her legs for warmth. Claire tried speaking, but her lips barely moved properly. "The eagle," she whispered weakly through frozen breath. "It brought me here." Neither man seemed to understand her at first. The older rescuer leaned closer while snow gathered across his hood and beard. Claire lifted one trembling hand and pointed weakly toward the dark trees above the valley. "The eagle," she repeated again. "It stayed with me." Both men turned instinctively toward the forest behind her. For a brief moment, the storm thinned just enough for the trees above the valley to become visible beneath the fading night sky. High on the branch of a snow-covered pine, the golden eagle remained perfectly still, watching from the darkness. The younger rescuer froze in surprise. Even from a distance, the bird looked enormous against the storm, its silhouette outlined faintly by drifting snow and moonlight hidden behind clouds. Then the wind swept through the valley again, and the eagle launched silently into the air. Claire watched weakly as it disappeared beyond the trees without a sound, gone as suddenly as it had first appeared beside her in the snow. One of the men helped Claire carefully to her feet, while the other guided them through the valley toward the lights she had seen earlier. The cabin hidden there was small but alive with warmth. Smoke curled from the chimney into the storm, while yellow light spilled across the snow from frost-covered windows. Claire nearly cried at the sight of it. The moment they opened the door, heat rushed over her frozen skin so suddenly it hurt. Real warmth. Fire crackled loudly inside an iron stove while the scent of wood smoke filled the air. The younger rescuer helped remove Claire's ice-covered gloves and coat carefully, while the older man poured steaming water into a metal cup nearby. Claire's hands shook violently now as feeling slowly returned to her fingers. Pain followed immediately after. Sharp burning pain spreading through numb skin and stiff muscles. Yet beneath it all came something stronger. Relief. The kind that left people speechless after surviving something they no longer believed they could survive. The dog settled quietly beside the stove while snow continued striking the cabin windows outside. Claire sat wrapped in blankets near the fire, staring silently into the flames while exhaustion dragged heavily at her eyes. Across the room, the two rescuers spoke quietly in Russian, though she caught only fragments she understood. Storm. Valley. Impossible. Lucky. Claire swallowed slowly and looked toward the frosted window beside the fire. Beyond the glass, the Siberian wilderness remained endless and dark beneath the storm. Somewhere out there, beyond the valley and trees, the eagle had vanished back into the frozen night without leaving behind anything except questions no one would fully believe. Claire remained inside the mountain cabin for 3 days while the storm buried the valley beneath nearly 4 feet of fresh snow. During that time, the rescuers learned enough English to understand fragments of her story, though neither man fully believed what she described at first. People survived Siberian storms through luck, preparation, or rescue teams, not by following a wild eagle through the wilderness for miles in near-total whiteout conditions. Yet every detail Claire remembered remained strangely precise despite the hypothermia. The bird had appeared beside her the moment she collapsed in the snow. It had kept her awake when exhaustion almost pulled her unconscious. It had led her away from hidden ice and toward shelter not once, but twice. Most disturbing of all, it had refused to abandon her even when she stopped trying to save herself. The older rescuer finally admitted something unusual after listening quietly beside the fire one evening. Hunters in remote parts of Siberia sometimes told stories about large eagles following travelers during winter storms. Not attacking them, watching them. The stories sounded more like old folklore than reality, the kind passed between generations around isolated campfires during long winters. Most people ignored them, but every few years someone survived impossible conditions and claimed they had not been alone in the wilderness after all. Claire tried convincing herself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the eagle had simply been curious. Maybe hypothermia distorted her memory and made ordinary events feel supernatural afterward. But deep down she knew the truth felt stranger than that. The bird had made decisions. It had reacted whenever she stopped moving. It had circled back repeatedly through the storm instead of disappearing into safety. Even now, sitting beside the warmth of the cabin fire days later, Claire could still remember the way those golden eyes watched her through the snow, as if measuring whether she would continue fighting or finally surrender to the cold. When the storm finally cleared enough for travel, the rescuers drove Claire by snow vehicle toward the nearest settlement nearly 40 miles away. The world outside looked transformed beneath endless white snowfields glowing beneath pale winter sunlight. Entire sections of forest had vanished beneath drifts taller than vehicles. Looking at the landscape now, Claire understood something terrifying. Had she collapsed even half a mile farther north inside the open valley, the storm would have buried her completely before anyone ever found her. The realization stayed with her long after she returned home to Montana weeks later. Friends and family celebrated her survival, but Claire noticed something strange afterward. Part of her still felt trapped inside that frozen forest. Ordinary life sounded different now. Cities felt louder, warmer, fragile somehow. Sometimes late at night, she would wake suddenly after dreaming about endless white snow and the sound of wings beating through a storm. Yet alongside the fear remained something else too. Gratitude, not only toward the rescuers who found her, but toward the impossible creature that refused to let her disappear beneath the snow. Nearly a year later, Claire returned to Siberia one final time during early winter. The rescuers thought she was crazy for traveling back after everything that happened, but Claire felt pulled there by something she could not explain. She hiked only a short distance into the valley, this time beneath calm skies and fresh snow. The abandoned cabin still stood hidden among the trees exactly where she remembered it. Silent, frozen, waiting. Claire stopped beside it for several minutes.